beginning. Even my name, Albert, I was named after Albert Nzula, who was an African trade unionist, a member of the Communist Party, who died a couple of years before I was born. And my mom and my dad, Solly, they had enormous respect for him, and they named me after him. Ironically, he would have been named after Prince Albert. And I grew up in a very anti-monarchist family, but here I am being given the name Albie that I have today, comes via communist to Prince Albert, Queen Victoria's husband. That's my background.
And where did you go to school and what did you study?
What's my name? My surname? my surname?
Sachs. Nice Jewish name.
What school did I go to?
King David?
No.
Carmel?
No, Sachs. I went to Sachs. I was Sachs from Sachs. Sachs School, South African Public School in Cape Town. You don't know Sachs?
I didn't even know it existed, sorry.
You're obviously not a Cape Townian.
No, I'm very much a Joburger. We don't have a mountain here. We have a hill in Northcliffe.
I know, and you don't have Bishops, and you don't have Rondebosch Boys High, and you don't have Sachs and Wynberg, which were the big schools, boys' schools for white boys in those days. So I was at Sachs, South African College School, and of course people commented for 10 years, Sachs from Sachs, and they used to say Sachs, bags, bottles and rags, and I used to laugh.
Well, my grandfather was in the sacking industry in England. He had a Flexa Hessian sacking.
Okay.
So, yeah, so absolutely. We've got something in common. We're both in Sachs. Mother, go back in your box.
That's about a standard 2 level of joke.
Yeah, well, some people, what can I say? And then after school?
So then I went to UCT. I enjoyed school. Most people hate school, or they say they hate school. I quite enjoyed it. But I was a little disappointed. There wasn't the energy there, the excitement that I expected. And I thought, well, I'll go to university and that's where it's at. I didn't find too much at UCT. And in England, when I went to the PhD at Sussex University, I felt that's where it would be at. You can find it if you look for it, but somehow the place wasn't buzzing with intellectual energy and interesting, fascinating debates. So I enjoyed my 5 years at UCT, with a slight sense of disappointment, learning a lot, becoming politically active in my second year, but getting most of my, if you like, inner excitement off the campus in what we call the Modern Youth Society, which was very closely allied to the ANC, joining in the Defiance campaign when I was 17, sitting on a bench at the General Post Office marked non-whites only. 2 years later, going to the Congress of the People where the Freedom Charter was adopted. So all of these things kind of connected up in my life and can, if you like, part of my destiny working its way through my life.
Do you feel that your life was on a sort of a preordained path for yourself? I mean, was it, I mean, it almost looks like you followed that kind of route.
Yeah. I don't believe in predestination. I don't believe there's a providence that takes over our lives. I believe that we make choices. But I believe it's good to be ready for accident, to be ready for chance, to have a strong internal sense of who you are, what you think, what interests you, what's important. And then when the opportunities come, you can go with them. And there's no doubt I was profoundly shaped by growing up in what some people would call a dysfunctional family. It was dysfunctional in the sense, separated parents, single mom, but dysfunctional in the South African sense. It didn't slot into the whole apartheid setup, even to some extent in terms of patriarchy. With my mom, she's a strong person in a very quiet way, but she had all these strong women friends, trade union leaders, activists, full of laughter and strength. And I grew up a feminist, not knowing the word, not knowing the concept, but just seeing women who were independent, who made their own life choices, who had verve and were decisive and not dependent on men, or feeling dependent on men, or feeling crushed by men. So these were all factors that shaped me.
So, and then you went off to varsity and studied an LLB?
It was called a BA LLB. First the BA, 3 years with some law subjects, and then another 2 years LLB. I took off a year and I sailed to England. It was quite something. You'd go down to the docks and there'd be the Union Castle boat. And it was going like there's another world out there. And in our imaginations then, Europe somehow was an amazing place, a real space, an important space, not just England, but Europe. And you had to feel you hadn't lived unless you'd been there. And in a sense, our minds were colonized by the literature. I remember the Cape Times having a big poster one day saying, "Gales lash Cornwall." That's in Cape Town. The poster, "Gales lash Cornwall." Why should we be interested in the weather? But even the weather in England kind of counted. So then I was, let's see, I was 19. I started 16, 17, 18. I was still 18 when I went to England. I got my BA.
What was that, about 55 or so?
That was, it was 54.
54.
Yeah.
But my mom came out on the Union Castle, in fact. And I have her, when did you come out?
55.
Okay, you must have crossed at the docks. I have the suitcase that she came out, and on the side of it is this big Union Castle sticker, which is like, you know, I quite like it. It's on my table, making a nuisance of itself. So yeah, a bit of history there. Was it an uneventful journey? How long were you in England for?
I spent a year there, and I wanted to work. I wanted to earn some money, and my dad said, "No, you'll spend the rest of your life working. I want you to read." And he said, "I must study the classics." And the classics were Marx, Engels, Lenin, and Stalin.
We know how those ended.
And the Greek classics. In fact, I found reading Engels the most interesting of all. Marx was very difficult to get into, and he's full of polemics. Lenin had all these long Russian names full of polemics. Stalin was easy to read, but it didn't kind of connect up, and it didn't have the ugly side of Stalin. But Engels was a thinker, was a feminist, wrote beautifully, and that was quite valuable, learning to read on my own, not read for exams, not read to write an essay. I remember reading War and Peace. It was one weekend. Not Dostoevsky, Tolstoy. In one weekend. It was a cold, freezing weekend in Manchester. And I decided I'm going to read this book. You can't call yourself educated if you haven't read War and Peace. And you would put shillings in the electric heater in front on the wall. You'd have to keep putting in shillings, and you would toast your knees. Your knees would be hot and your bum would be cold. And then I'd turn around and read, my bum would get burnt and my knees would freeze. And in the event, I read it, like right through, just stopping to eat, go to the toilet, to sleep, in like 3 or 4 days nonstop. But I could do it. That was part of my year off in England, a very, very rich and valuable year in all sorts of ways. It was when rationing ended. It was when some people around the corner upstairs had television. You could see Wimbledon. So I saw some of the first TV in England. And it was England coming out of the post-war austerity. Quite an interesting time, and an interesting time for me to wonder, to imagine, and then coming back to South Africa after that. I'd done there. I'd been to, and I'd got over that urge, that necessity to somehow go to Europe and be part of that cultivated world. I never felt that urge again after that.
It's funny you should mention War and Peace. I had a boyfriend who didn't like what I used to read. And he said, you really need to read some of the classics. So I tried reading Crime and Punishment. I think I read 30 pages and I thought, I don't know how anybody does this to themselves. And he's Russian to start with. So I said to him the one day, have you actually read this? Because it's appalling. I'm ready to shoot myself reading it. He said, no, why would I have read it? I'm like, okay, end of classics.
But I hope you've read it now. It's a fantastic book.
I can't do depressing. Life is just so difficult without actually reading a book that you want to shoot yourself off in the first 30 pages. No, not for me. When are you? I mean, were you part of the ANC or the Communist Party or the crossover?
So I was in the Modern Youth Society, we were called, in Cape Town, and we couldn't call ourselves socialists because the Suppression of Communism Act banned preaching socialism. So we called ourselves modern. And guess who my fellow travelers were? It was Ben Turok, Dennis Goldberg, Mary Turok, and various others. And if you judge an organization, its success by the number of years its members spend in jail, we were amazingly successful. George Peake went to jail, Amy Thornton, Amy Ritstein went to jail, Dennis for 22 years. But we were very brave, we were very idealistic, we were very into culture. We painted a mural that was kind of, the idea came from the Mexican muralists. I don't know if you're familiar with Diego Rivera and Orozco and Siqueiros. They took the paintings out of the churches into the streets and did beautiful pictures of Mexican history. So we did a painting of the people's Cape Town, not tourist Cape Town, the dock workers, the train workers, the flower sellers, the newspaper sellers. And we blocked out the different squares, and it was fantastic. Until the police came, we were moved out. We didn't even take a photograph of that building. But when I went to Mozambique, many, many years later, after the revolution, everybody was painting murals on the walls. I painted till we ran out of paint. That ended that. And then when I'm head of the art committee on the Constitutional Court, now I had my opportunity. We didn't actually paint murals on the walls, but we got paintings, sculpture, beautiful carpets, wall hangings.
Your doors.
On into the Constitutional Court. So these ideas that were planted in the Modern Youth Society, those tiny little seeds grew into beautiful oaks, if you like, 50 years later.
That's magical. We were actually talking on Saturday to Andrew Lindsay, who did the doors for the Concord. And they're absolutely beautiful, those doors.
The doors and, yeah, the cladding inside, the mosaics, the hangings. And people say, you know, they'd say often, Albie, you know, how can you spend money on art when there's so many people who are hungry and who don't have a roof over their heads? And I say, are you saying poor people only want a roof over their heads and a full stomach, that poor people aren't interested in beauty, aren't interested in justice? And I've carried that story through. When I travel around the world, I speak about our court, that the court of justice is not just there to establish rules. It's a place of humanity, of feeling, of sensibility, of compassion, of recognition that everybody must feel welcome. And I might say we put up that building long before the word decolonization was used. We didn't do it according to a theory. We did it according to what we wanted. We wanted a South African court with a South African feel, steeped in the culture, the tradition, the symbolism, if you like, the idea of justice under a tree. That's the main theme, justice under a tree. That open air feeling, that participatory feeling, that feeling of transparency, all of that conveyed by the architecture. And we like to feel by the way in which the judges function, dealt with counsel, respected the clients coming there.
What are your feelings about our government as it stands today?
Well, I'll start at the top. because I'm very, very proud of our president. I'm very proud of our Minister of Health. To me, represent the finest qualities in South Africa of thoughtfulness, intelligence, compassion, heart, and openness. And it's important at the top, because we know when at the top there's something wrong, even if it's somebody who had a wonderful life journey in many ways, was very, very brave, who'd been persecuted, who'd been very thoughtful, very open. If things went sadly, bitterly wrong, that wrongness seeps down into the society in all sorts of ways. It sets a terrible example. So I'm impressed by the thoughtfulness and the poise and the compassion, the articulate quality, and the sharing of themes and ideas at the top. In terms of government generally, it's enormously uneven. It's enormously uneven, like our society is enormously uneven. What gives me courage now is important steps have been taken to come clean, to clean up. And we see it in terms, for example, of the prosecuting authority that clearly wasn't doing its job. Now, again, excellent leadership, not promising the world and doing little, doing things correctly, and we hope effectively, and the prosecutions are beginning. I think that's extremely important for the rule of law in this country. But it's important that they be done properly, with proper evidence, not show trials, and hopefully we're moving into that era. I'm impressed with the Zondo Commission, which is really functioning without fear or favor, listening to what's happening. It's often extremely inconvenient for those in government, in power, but that's the reality. So these are things that I like. I feel we're a very free and open society. That's amazing, actually. We just take it for granted. My books were banned before. Now people can say more or less what they like in this country. So that's all fantastic. We're not a safe country in terms of physical safety. There's far too much violence in the home, in the streets, in society. And we're certainly not an equal country, and we're not a fair country. And basically, it's still the structures of inequality from the past that are still functioning, but we can't put everything onto the past. We've made mistakes, we've made bad mistakes, we've had wicked people, corrupt people in positions of power. We've exposed them to quite a large extent, but we need to do a lot more to correct the things that have gone wrong. And we have to take responsibility for things that have gone wrong on our watch, under our responsibility. But what I feel very proud of as a South African who was involved in the whole transformation from an apartheid state to a democracy, we used to be told, do you seriously believe one man, one vote once? Do you seriously believe that black people in this country are ready for democracy? Come on, it took us 1,000 years, I don't know who the us are, to get democracy in Europe. Now, the democracy in Europe, my growing up, was Hitler and Mussolini and concentration camps and atomic bombs. So that wasn't something to be proud of. The democracy I found was through people like Oliver Tambo and Albert Lutuli and Nelson Mandela in the ranks of the ANC. And what I feel so proud of is we had our democratic elections. We have freer and fairer elections in South Africa than they have in America. A higher percentage of votes for our local government elections the last time than America had for their presidential elections. We have a very lively free press, great investigative journalists. So in that sense, it's been quite remarkable that we've got a country called South Africa, that we've had 5 general elections that are free and fair, that when the ANC lost in Joburg, can you imagine? They stepped out of office. When they lost in Port Elizabeth, they stepped down. They lost in Pretoria, they stepped down. So these are very important and profound things that we take for granted. And in a way, it's good we take them for granted, but we had to fight for every single one of them. And they're all consistent with democracy, openness. We haven't had a single president who stepped down because of assassination, or because tanks are coming to the streets, or a million people going to the squares. In fact, we haven't had a single president who's done the full 10 years. We take that for granted, but it's because of our democracy, and it's the democracy that gives me hope and courage and strength. But democracy only works when the people make it work. And it was the input of millions that gave us our constitution, that saved us from civil war during the negotiating period. And I believe it's got to be the impact and input of millions that's going to make our democracy work now.
What about Jacob Zuma? I know he's in the background stirring and trying to destabilize the current government. What are your feelings towards him?
Well, you know, I didn't mention names earlier. My feelings are feelings of intense, almost tragic sadness, because he was my chief representative in Mozambique. I was there for 11 years, and he was outstanding. He was warm, he was hardworking, he was thoughtful, self-taught, admirable in many, many, many ways. And I remember I was actually in Lisbon getting an honorary degree when I switched on the TV in the evening, and I heard him give his resignation speech. And I felt part of me was absolutely jubilant that he'd been forced to step down because he knew Parliament would vote him out of office because our democracy was working. Part of me was jubilant, and part of me was weeping for somebody who now, instead of being remembered for what he'd achieved, with many years on Robben Island, he's worked in the underground, he's worked in Mozambique, and he's worked in KZN. He was the great peacemaker.
Yeah.
At the time when Harry Gwala wanted to fight and others wouldn't take decisions, he said, we've got to stop the war with Buthelezi. We've got to talk. So he had many, many great positive qualities. And to see him now, his laughter used to be famous. He even told me once that somebody had been sent in to spy against the ANC, heard Zuma laughing, and he decided to own up because of your laughter, he said. And now the laughter became ha, 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 you know, a sign of derision, of people laughed about his laughter. It was very, very painful, very sad to see.
What do you think went so wrong with him? I mean, was it the money that corrupted?
I think part of it was, you know, people had lived without money for decades in exile. You got a bit of pocket money. You weren't immunized, if you like, against all the temptations of authority, of power. And he said, okay, you know, Sheikh, and this is what's being alleged now, so I don't want to go into the actual trial and so on, but you look after my finances. And this is the allegation, I'll look after you in terms of introducing you to people and so on. That's one of the issues to be determined. But I think one of the things that we have learned in a very painful way is the way what power does to people. And you can never tell in advance. Some people are kind of feeble and meek and nebbish and nothing, and they given some authority, and they're amazing. They've got qualities that have been hidden. And other people seem to be fine leaders with great integrity, and then just something goes. You know, we were blessed having people like Albert Luthuli, whose name is hardly known today. But he was the great predecessor of Tambo, Oliver Tambo, who's my personal big hero, and of course Nelson Mandela, and we've got Desmond Tutu. So that's four greats. That can't just be coincidence. There's something in our society, in the nature of our struggle, the way different cultures have interacted, the way different themes have intermingled, producing a very rich, very South African textured style and way of doing things. So everybody says, oh, the great Nelson Mandela. But it wasn't just one great figure or person. He embodied it with his own flair and personality. But when you've got all these other people as well, and then I can mention so many others. You know, I've just been writing something about Ruth Mompati, who worked in the office of Tambo and Mandela. And she was such a fine, dignified person in so many different circumstances. And you know, there are many, many, many more. Freni Janwala also did fabulous work in exile. And then she's the very imperious speaker of the National Assembly. All of these people came from the South African struggle, from South African background, from different cultural backgrounds. And I still see that as a major source. How, I don't know, Mandi, what you would be like. Have you got power?
Have I got power? I'm just grateful the power's on at home at the moment.
Yeah, so
I would be a terrible politician.
Yeah.
I would definitely not be a decent politician. I go hell for leather and I run an emotional basis as opposed to an intellectual one. And I'm very bad at debating stuff. So no, definitely not for me.
Yeah. You sound like a good civil society person.
Yeah.
You know, one reason, I remember 1994, the elections are coming, and suddenly I had emotions I'd never had before. Who's going to be the first Minister of Justice? There were 4 of us on the Constitutional Committee, all lawyers. It was Zola Squia and Dada Omar, Justice Albie Sachs. And I'm thinking, am I going to be waiting? Will the phone ring? I spent my whole life fighting for this freedom, for elections, one person, one vote. I lost the arm in the struggle, blown up in Mozambique. And now I'm going to worry, will the phone ring? And I just rejected the idea. And I thought, okay, I'm finished now. I've done my bit. We're getting our freedom. I can do something else. I'd love to be a judge on the Constitutional Court. Not to exercise power, to restrain power. That idea appealed to me. If I couldn't be a judge on that court, I didn't want to be just an ordinary lawyer anymore. Then I wanted to make movies. But it was that moment of, if you like, switching for me. You know, it was very important. And in a sense, I can speak with the enthusiasm and the passion that I speak, and if you like, certitude, partly because I didn't stay on in politics. I didn't get worn out by the heaviness of it, the routine of it, the necessary compromises. Politics needs its compromises, by the disappointments and so on. On the court, we had, in a sense, a very pure existence. Working with this constitution we fought so hard to achieve. It's a beautiful, wonderful constitution. As good as any you get in the world. It's very progressive. And I'm working with a great team of people from vastly different backgrounds. And we're all trying to uphold that constitution. And it has held, and our Constitutional Court has held. It's something very remarkable. And it's another source of hope for me. So it's hope inside my heart, but also my brain is saying, we've got institutions that are working, and the Constitutional Court is one of them.
It's because they're working in such a beautiful environment.
Yes, and the environment, it's not an accident. We chose that site, the site of the old Fort Prison, where Gandhi and Mandela have been locked up. We South Africans can brag. We have the only prison in the world where both Gandhi and Mandela were locked up. No one else can make that claim. And many, many more. And that's where we decided to put our court, because we don't say, forget our history, bury it, belongs to the past. We don't say knock down the prisons. We say turn the sword into a plowshare. Turn around the pain, take that energy, harness it, turn it negativity into positivity. We put up the court there. We don't forget the past. We're not trapped in the past. And it's an amazingly emotional space to be in, a constant reminder of why we have a constitution, why we have judges. And in the court, we have that ribbon of glass, so we see people walking by outside, deliberately there as a reminder that judges are not cut off from society. I'd be quite amused because you just see the knees of people walking by. You can't tell if it's a he, she, black, white, brown, and we're supposed to be in a non-racial, non-sexist universe, and there it's non-racial, non-sexist knees walking by the court.
What about Helen Zille's comment that South Africa has more racial laws today than it did during apartheid?
You know, I've been a friend of Helen's since I got back from exile in 1990. But at times I find she is so weird. And that's absolutely weird statement. It's beyond bananas. You know, I used to deal as a lawyer with all those acts, the Native Urban Areas Act, the Group Areas Act, the Immorality Act, the Native Settlements Act. If Helen had carried a past, she would never make that statement. She would realize how horrible and ugly it is to say that. To say that black economic empowerment, which people can argue about, is equal to the pass laws, to the reserving, you know, every single transaction for a house had to say, this house, every lawyer transferring a house had to say, from a white person to a white person. The most banal legal transactions had race built into it, everywhere, all the time, everything. The seats, the post offices, the buses, the beaches, the cinemas, the schools, everything segregated. Helen, come on, are you bananas? Are you crazy?
Maybe she was generalizing in terms of the fact that, you know, looking at it as one sort of a law, you know, you've got either black or you're white or you're colored, and that, you know, that's the way you go. But maybe, was she possibly referring to the...
It's so absurdly, absolutely not so. And the Constitution forbids that. The Constitution allows for affirmative action. And that Constitution was voted for by the Democratic Party. That the Bill of Rights is in the Constitution, voted for by the Democratic Party, and Section 9.2 allows for affirmative action. It's there in the Constitution. It means you can take account of race and gender. The Constitution says when it comes to appointing judges, you take account of race and gender. That's in the Constitution. So these things are permitted by the Constitution. And the court has held in different cases, if it's done in a way that just blocks out whole categories of people, it's unconstitutional. So there was a white woman, senior police officer, named Barnard, I think her name was.
Yeah, Barnard.
And she was refused a senior appointment, and the court said that that was a form of affirmative action that was not permissible because she had skills that nobody else had. So it's you know, I'm running out of adjectives to explain how totally irrational, absurd, actually it's painful. It's painful.
Well, she
because,
has
you know, Mandy, it reduces the level of discussion and debate.
Well, she has a penchant for putting her foot right in it, Helen, and creating a whole stir, as many, you know, quite often. I just want to give you some feedback that's going on here before we go too much further. You should certainly include your own name in the list of great SA people that you mentioned earlier. Judge, is there a difference between justice and social justice? And if so, what is the difference?
The difference between?
Justice and social justice.
No. Justice is a very broad theme. And it includes and requires social justice. And we fought very hard. You know, I remember when I was a late convert to a Bill of Rights. I belonged to the left critical legal studies people who said, don't have a Bill of Rights, it gives too much power to the judges. You fight for your rights in the streets, in Parliament. And the judges are conservative people and they always favor property and power. So leave health and leave education and leave water and leave social security, things like that, to Parliament. Don't make them fundamental rights. And then I started working with Oliver Tambo. And he was saying, you know, Albie, a Bill of Rights is the only way to go in South Africa. Either that or we have group rights. Either we have individuals, all citizens, all equal, respected for the humanity, or we have rights for Afrikaners, rights for blacks, rights for colored people, rights for Indians, and that would have been a total disaster.
Yeah,
we would have ended up with 3 presidents. Mandela on Monday, representing the broad black population, de Klerk on Tuesday, representing white Afrikaners, Buthelezi on Wednesday, representing the Zulu speakers. That was seriously being projected. And Tambo said, no, we need a Bill of Rights to provide protections, not group rights. So I became a convert to group rights, to a Bill of Rights. And like many converts, I now became more enthusiastic than the original believers. But then, you know, our members were very worried, this Bill of Rights thing, somebody called the Bill of Whites, to just protect property, lawyers, technical things. And I said, no, we can have a right to education. We can have a right to health. We can have a right to housing. They must go into the Constitution, and we got them into our Constitution. And a lot of my work on as a judge on the court dealt with evictions, and particularly saving the poor, who are being evicted without alternative accommodation to make way for development. And we felt that can't be right. The poor had fought so hard for our democracy. Now they're being chucked out. Social Security has saved South Africa. It's costly, but it meant instead of starvation, we have hunger, but hunger is not the same as starvation as we had before. And that's because it's a right in the Constitution. And my colleague Zola Squia, who's on the Constitutional Committee with me in exile, he was the Public Administration Social Security Minister who got it in. So in that sense, social justice is a very important component part of general justice. It's as important as the right to vote, the right to speak your mind, and it's as important as the right to go to court to settle your disputes, which we can do to a great extent in South Africa today.
Which you can't afford to do because lawyers are so expensive.
A lot of poor people go to court using organizations like the Legal Resources Center, Lawyers for Human Rights, environmental groups and others. They bring test cases and have often been very, very successful.
Okay, I've got some more feedback for you. Albie, you are amazing. I am fascinated. I wish I could have tea with you one day. Well, you could have today if we get a, you know, we weren't in lockdown. You've been brave, compassionate, and as you say, enthusiastic. I'm going to find your books. Can't wait to read them. That was from Anne. Hello, Albie. Whilst I applaud your loyalty and devotion to the ANC, I believe that Mandela, Tambo, and et al. Are turning in their graves. Their sacrifice and decades of hard work, their integrity have been betrayed by the actions and inactions of the last 20 years of the ANC. I think the lens through which you view and describe them is rose-tinted. How do you feel about that?
Well, yeah, I've actually got my lens with me.
Oh, they match. We both got red glasses.
But I'll be very worried when I cease to be a romantic. You know, when I was blown up, the bomb in Maputo, and total darkness. I don't know what's happened to me. I know something terrible. And the voice is, Albie, you're in Maputo Central Hospital. It's Eva Garrido speaking. Your arm is in lamentable condition. You must face the future with justice, with courage. And I said, what happened? And a woman's voice said, it was a car bomb. And I fainted, but I fainted into joy because I knew I was safe. I thought I was being kidnapped to be thrown to jail. And then some time passes and I tell myself a joke. Now I'm telling this joke so often, I'm surprised there's anyone in South Africa who hasn't heard it, but maybe your Tea Party hasn't reached there. And it's about Jaime Cohn, who like me is a Jew. He falls off a bus and he does what looks like the sign of the cross. And his friend says, Jaime, I didn't know you were Catholic. What do you mean Catholic? Spectacles, testicles, wallet and watch. He's checking out. And I checked out for some reason. I started testicles, and all seemed to be in order. And I'd spent all my life trying to be macho, never succeeded. But for 15 minutes, I had great fame. And the first thing Comrade Albie did was reach for his balls. Wallet, I feel my heart seems to be okay. Spectacles, there's a crater. I know if there's brain damage, it can be very serious. And then my arm slides down. Watch, I've lost an arm. I've only lost an arm. I felt joyous.
Yeah.
That moment you waiting for in the freedom struggle, will they come for me? They'd come for me. Would I be brave? I'd be brave. I'd got through. They tried to kill me. I'd survived. And I had a total conviction as I got better, my country would get better. And you know what? I was right. That was 88.
Right.
In 1990, I came back. So I'm optimistic. We've got through so much. And it's important to be optimistic. It's important to have hope. It's important to look at the green shoots and the positive signs. It doesn't mean you don't see the other things. But if you give way to cynicism, to despair, to hopelessness, in a sense, that's self-perpetuating. If you retain that optimism, which we did in very, very dark days. I remember the time of the spread of HIV in this country, how people were dying in their thousands, hundreds of thousands. It seemed we've got our freedom in South Africa and now we're going to lose everything to the virus. And what made it worse was at the top, the brilliant, wonderful, extraordinary president we had who did such marvelous things.
Becky.
In Mbeki, in the negotiating period, so wise, so thoughtful, so skillful, so humane, who made that beautiful speech, I'm an African, when we got the new constitution, was in denial about HIV. It made one weep, it made one weep, it made one weep. But we got through that, and now we have the biggest antiretroviral program in the world in South Africa. So we will get through what's happening now, and there'll be people inside the ANC and outside the ANC, inside the DA and outside the DA, inside the EFF and outside the EFF, inside and outside other parties as well, and people who don't belong to any party in civil society, and people who just do things in their own environment with employees or employers or neighbors or tennis club they belong to, whatever it might be. It's going to require the inputs, but the positivity of everybody. So I'm not a blind loyalist. I haven't been in the ANC since that day in April 1994. I didn't burn my card. I didn't denounce it. I was very proud of what we'd achieved. I don't think Tambo is turning in his grave. I don't think Lutuli's turning in his grave. I don't think Mandela's turning in his grave. I think they're all pleased that we have a country called South Africa, that we have democracy, that we have rights, that we can speak openly and freely, that we are debating these issues. I think all of that would have been wonderful. In a sense, they were saying what we dedicated our lives towards was to create a country, to give people the rights, to give the people to change their government, to give people the right to demand better, to organize, to get things better. And I think they'll be pleased that they achieved that. Then they say, we've done our bit, we're out of the picture now. So it's up to the new generation to carry forward. And I'm meeting so many wonderful young people from all communities, thoughtful, sharp, with I don't know what that quality is. It's a South African quality. It's a mixture of seriousness and humor and a sense of history and an ability to use language in quite a strong rhetorical way, and a questing and a searching and not bowing down. Our people don't bow down. Our people speak out. So all of these things give me hope.
From Sharmini, I think the lack of good education, social housing, etc. shows the shortcomings of the Bill of Rights. People still need to fight for these things socially.
Right, and the Bill of Rights say that, exactly. It's not a shortcoming. The shortcoming is the implementation of the Bill of Rights, not what's in the Bill of Rights.
I'm thinking about children, white children of today. It seems that they don't have a voice or a place in our beloved South Africa. What do you think of the role of the young, vibrant South Africans today?
Well, that's not my experience. You know, I've got a child at local school, majority whites, and the kids speak out. They're full of ideas. They're arguing and debating. Right now, my son is arguing with a friend of his who happens to be a Trump supporter, and they're not afraid to express their views. So what is positive is young white kids learning about a whole country, not just their community and their particular ancestors. In the history stories now, getting a much greater sense of a wider South Africa, and learning not just from the school books, but from the kids in their class, the parents meeting each other and so on. We've still got such a long way to go. But, you know, if you had to add up all the advantages and disadvantages, to be white, to be male, you still have an advantage in South Africa now. By and large.
Today on the news, I heard that to help the fight against COVID, the government is pumping money into the informal townships for sanitation. And the only thought that I had was, it's 25 years too late. They should have done it. I mean, they've had all these years to raise the standard of living in the townships and the informal settlements, and they didn't do it. And now, when we have to fight COVID, now it's reactionary instead of proactionary, which I have a personal issue with, you know. Anyway.
Yeah, okay. Now, this is my response. I wish we'd done more and lots more. But it's not we haven't done anything. The government has provided 3 million homes free to people living in informal settlements. If you have an average of 4 or 5 people per home, it's a quarter of the population have moved from shacks into homes with water, electricity, sewage. They're not fabulous homes. They're often far away from places of work. They're not communities. But that's huge. There's no other country in the world where such a big section of the population has been given free housing. In terms of the welfare payments, the child grants, the old age grants, and disability grants, something like a third of the population now get those grants. It's not that the government has done nothing. It's cushioned the starvation and hunger. And if people have continued to vote for the ANC, it's not because people are stupid, or they're scared, or there's some demagogue. They've actually seen their lives improve. When I went to UCT last year, when my wife Vanessa got a master's degree, it was fantastic to see the Vice Chancellor, the professors, the people up there, the parents of the kids who are graduating now. It's transformed. It's maybe 2/3 Black graduates, and in engineering and medicine, and not just law and so on, accountancy. So there have been huge changes in this country. It could have been more, it should have been more. We haven't found the way to really crack the economy. And I'm not sure what the answer is. Many people point to the Asian tigers, Lee Kuan Yew in Singapore. He had a one-party state. He threw opponents into jail. He banned trade unions. He banned newspapers. When I spoke in Singapore, the International Bar Association had their first annual meeting there about 10, 15 years ago. They said, before you make your speech, I have the winding up speech, you've got to show it to a police captain in Singapore. He had to read it to make sure I wasn't an agitator. That's an International Bar Association meeting. At first I wanted to refuse. They said, look, just give him something. And it turned out to be very, very positive. We don't work through dictatorship here. It wouldn't work in South Africa. It would become purely racialized. It could become tribalized. So we're paying the price for democracy. Lots of things are open, lots of things are porous, lots of space for opportunists. We're paying that price. But we have made progress. We've made a lot of progress. And life has got better for millions and millions of people. There's a very big black middle class in South Africa now that's driving our economy. That's driving our economy. That's buying the motor cars, the fridges, the TV sets, the games. The universities have a majority of black, I think at every single university now, majority of students, increasing number of professors are black. Black leadership is very common. So there has been change, it's been huge change, but not nearly enough.
Okay. Is the new law to allow individuals to stand for political office in elections going to make a difference, do you think?
I think it will be useful if it encourages more independence of spirit, but I don't think it's going to make much difference in practice. It's got a lot of dangerous possibilities that individuals can stand and then they auction themselves off in Parliament if there's a very close sort of hung Parliament, and it can be very, very damaging. But I think we can find intelligent ways of responding to what the Constitutional Court was getting at. And we've got something to help us very much. The late Justice Albie Sachs headed a commission recommending a change to the system that we have at the moment, which is pure proportional representation national, proportional representation provincial, for provincial national government, and then a mixed system at the local government level. And at the local government level, you can have individual ratepayers standing for constituencies. I'm sad to say it hasn't stopped corruption there. But he recommended something at the national level for large, fairly large constituencies that maybe 10 members. Cape Town could have maybe 3 constituencies where you are answerable to the local people. They have a direct sense of who the MPs are, but you don't get, what we don't want is group areas for voting. A black area sends a black person to Parliament, a coloured area, a coloured person, and people mobilizing on ethnicity. That would be terrible if we have that.
We go backwards then.
That going backwards. We don't want something where the strong man, the patriarch, the gangster, the bully, dominates, controls the local people and becomes the spokesperson. There are lots of dangers. But I think if we follow the Justice Albie Commission report, it was a majority report there, and then you have proportional representation to top up at the end to make sure that the constitutional requirement of in general proportional representation is there. I think we can get a good outcome.
Just going back a little bit, do you feel or do you think that the ANC carried forward in the 94 elections, should they have disbanded as a struggle movement and reformed as a political party? Did they carry a struggle movement mentality forward?
You know, I wish they'd carried the struggle mentality forward more, not less. And I'll tell you why. Not in the sense of they had to see it's a new kind of a struggle with new rules, but the sense of integrity, of loyalty to a higher cause and purpose, the sense of being part of a larger project and not just to get ahead and advance yourself was very powerful in the struggle, and we've lost that. So people started joining the ANC because then you become the mayor, and when you're the mayor, you can dish out a contract to your family and friends and get water and all the rest. That's the ordinary political party kind of a thing, which sadly you get all over the world. We have ordinary political parties. I think we needed a huge cultural shift in terms of the rhetoric, the language, the style, but those core values were the values that the Congress Party had in India that came with independence, where the Congress Party had to destroy the feudal kingdoms that existed, all sorts of very, very retrograde features of Indian public life. They had to create a new state, a new economy, and it required a strong party with a national project to do that. And in that sense, the ANC accomplished many things. We had a peaceful transition. We didn't have the collapse that so many people predicted. What happened? Black people in government, everything is chaos. We didn't have that chaos. The country became a country. Things were functioning. I used to say, you switch on the lights and the lights come on. And I said that at a meeting in East London 3 years ago, and the lights went off as I said that. And of course, now we've had all the outages. You open the taps and water comes out, and then of course we have the drought in Cape Town. So I don't make that boast, but we do have a functioning country, which has been a huge achievement. And it's been very much an ANC achievement. I don't think anybody else could have done it. And it's quite rightly associated with the steadiness that went with the Mandela era, if you like. Seeing his main function to get composure in the society, to get everybody used to, black people, brown, white people, used to having black people calling the shots, because they are the majority, they are the people most affected by government, supporting government, and now in government. These were huge achievements, and that's all been very, very positive. And they all come with the ethos of the liberation struggle. The parts of the liberation struggle that were negative would be the forms of deployment. The idea of putting people in positions of authority who have a good track record of integrity, of honesty, of hard work, of collegiality. I'm not against that. But that can't be instead of competence, ability to work with others, and the need to have good people doing important work. So that was a very, very negative consequence. That's not permitted by our constitution, by the way, of the if you like, the liberation movement mentality. And there were other ways of people in Parliament defending the indefensible. I was, in that sense, very proud of my old friend Ben Turok, who'd been in the Modern Youth Society with me. We learned our lessons very early on in the struggle. And he refused to vote for a publications law. I think it was a publications law. He didn't make a big stand. He just found he had a need to go to the toilet when the vote was taken. But that was his quiet little way of refusing to go along. And too many people went along with things that were absolutely indefensible and defended things that were indefensible. And that's, to me, not part of the true liberation ethos. And those were the bad parts that went into the future.
Albie, today on the radio, I happened to spend a lot of time in the car today, so I heard the news 3 times. And the other thing that came up is that Annie Devani's killer has been released from jail after serving 9 years. How do you feel about that on a personal level?
You know, I think of that case, my deep sadness is the hired gun went to jail and the person who hired him
never went to jail.
Never went to jail. That's the deep sadness. I'm not a great believer, to be candid, in jail as such. I think it's important that the killer was sentenced. It's important for him. 9 years is actually a long time in jail. People who say it's like nothing are not people who've been to jail. In countries like Sweden and Denmark and Norway and so on, 9 years is a huge amount of time to go to jail. In America, they sent to jail for 500 years. So these things are very kind of elastic. But I don't think the longer jail sentences, and certainly not the death penalty, are the answer to questions of crime. It's catching the crooks, putting them on trial, sending them to jail for quite a long time. I think that's important.
And the death penalty being off the table for you completely?
It's so off the table, it's not even in the room, it's not even in the house. I must have defended 35 people facing the death sentence as a young advocate, which was the most gruesome thing. And you know, Mandi, what counted, what really mattered. You'd think what mattered when you got the case, you were a young lawyer, and the idea was we want to give the young lawyers training in court work, and we don't want anybody to be hanged if they haven't had a lawyer. So these cases would be given to the fresh graduates. And you'd look at the docket, and what would be the first thing you would look at? You would say, is this a swinger? We use that horrible term, a swinger. Is it a death sentence?
It has a different meaning in this day and age.
I know, it's positive. In our day, it was awful. And you didn't look at how gruesome the crime was. Was it premeditated? Did you use poison? Did you kill lots of people? The two things you looked at. The first thing was who against whom. If it was black killing black, no death sentence. If it was white killing white, no death sentence. White killing black, no death sentence. Black killing white, death sentence. So the race of the accused, the race of the victim, was the most important factor. The second most important factor was the judge. Joseph Herbstein never passed a single death sentence in 25 years. John Didcot never passed a single death sentence in 25 years. Judge Lata Khan would do 6 death sentences in 1 year. Now, it can't be pure chance and coincidence. It depended on the race, depended on the judge. The weight on everybody, the sense of if I messed up as a lawyer, my client's going to hang. It was terrible. And the idea that you make society better by putting a rope around someone's neck and hanging them till they're dead, cold-bloodedly killing, it was gruesome. I think South Africa peaked in 1987, 154 death sentences. It didn't stop murder, didn't go down the next year. And they had 6 nooses because it was more cost efficient. It saved time.
All in one.
Hang 6 people at one time. That was part of the logic. So my generation, we loathed the death penalty. And when the court had to decide, each one of our judges, we decided independently, we were unanimous. You don't kill in cold blood if you want to reduce violence and killing in society. But if you want to bring down crime, you do catch the people doing terrible things and you do send them to jail for a long period of time. That became the important motif.
Where do you stand on euthanasia? I mean, my mother and I were chatting today about an old friend who has ended up a quadriplegic. And my comment to her was, I would rather die at that point. But you don't have the right to kill yourself. So what is your attitude towards that?
Well, I haven't, certainly as a judge, I wasn't ever called upon to deal with it. I think there is a case maybe going to the Constitutional Court. It went quite far. By and large, I'm very open to the idea that if people are living in great pain, they're really suffering a lot, and they don't have the means to end their own lives, that provided certain very stringent conditions are, with independent medical testimony are there, I think the right to die a dignified death is something that should be upheld. But I haven't heard full argument on the whole thing. But there are people who are quadriplegic who have very rich lives and wonderful lives and very meaningful lives. And so I wouldn't use that as an example. But people who are in great pain and who feel their lives are lives of total suffering, I think should have the right to ask for and be given a painless death.
Look, maybe it was the wrong sort of example to use. I can use an example for me that's closer to home. I have multiple sclerosis, and I have already made that decision that should I reach a point in this disease where my body is no longer able to sustain me, then I will opt out. That's a non-negotiable. Sorry, Mom. My mother's sitting here. It's like, but I mean, it's a non-negotiable for me. I'm not prepared to live where I'm a burden to other people, and I don't want to live like that. You know, it would be personal choice. Last question before we let you go and have a decent supper and a nice shot of whiskey for the evening. Your comment on farm murders. Are they racial? Is it genocide? What are we dealing with here, and why are we in denial?
Okay, I think the genocide thing is actually painfully absurd. You know, it's actually very insensitive to real genocide. You know, huge chunks of my family were wiped out by real genocide, and there's been real genocide in Rwanda. and elsewhere. So one shouldn't throw out that kind of a thing, and that's very cheap. And it comes from people who are often extremely racist using that language. And they're the people who go to the United States and they get support from the white supremacists there. And they use that language of white genocide to gather support. So I think that's undignified, it's inappropriate. I feel for all subjects of murder, and I feel for white farmers, I feel for black farmers. And I can understand and one has to acknowledge that there are many people living in fear, intolerable fear, particularly in rural areas, farming areas. The evidence that I've seen indicates that farmers are not more, in terms of number, more susceptible than any other section of the population living in areas that are sparsely occupied to killings. That there's quite good cooperation, as I understand it, between farmers themselves and local police organizations. So people are not just passively waiting to be massacred, that things are being done about this. And I feel it's being utilized really by people who feel they've been dislodged from the white supremacy position that they occupy, that they feel is the natural place of whites in the world. They feel dislodged, and they're using that as a kind of stick to challenge the Mandelas, the transformations and change, to challenge the Ramaphosas. That's my sense of what's going on there.
Okay. It just, for me, I think killing a farmer, whatever race is unimportant here, should actually be, it should be treason, because you're killing the hand that feeds you. And without farmers, well, the nation goes hungry. That's all there is to it. So, and
people shouldn't have to go to sleep at night wondering, will I get through the night? Whether it's in a farm or in a suburb or in a suburb or Soweto, wherever it is. That shouldn't be there. We should feel concerned. And the fact that other people are suffering more is no reason why anybody should suffer at all. So I don't want anything I say to sound as though I don't feel for the farmers, not just because they're farmers, because they're human beings. They're South Africans, they're part of the nation.
I agree with you totally. Thank you, Albie, for all you have done for our society in your lifetime. We so need role models like yourself. Thank you for fighting the good fight all your life. Female president, who would you pick?
In the United States?
No, in South Africa. I don't care about the
United States. I would pick Michelle without
Michelle Obama.
Yeah.
Do you think we can come and live here? Because we need a bit of help. Huh?
No, I'm going to be on a program with her later in the year, but I can't tell you about it much now.
Can you get her phone number so I can ask her to come and Zoom with me, please?
No, we had a lovely meeting. Vanessa and I were actually at the White House. I got a medal there, nearby there, and it involved and Vanessa bought a hand puppet of a dinosaur, which she put in a bag, and it got past the security, and she gave it to Barack Obama to sign a message for our son Oliver at home, and he signed. Oliver, thank you for allowing your parents to come, and we've got it up here, up with somebody. So we actually have met them, and I can actually call him Barack and Michelle, and he'll call me Albie. But in any event, okay. I can think of somebody who I think would be a very good president of South Africa as a woman, but I'm not going to give a name.
So if I said to you, Thuli Madonsela, would you wink? One of the biggest problems, I was chatting to Tembi Mapizangakula a couple of months ago, and the problem, and she said to me, is that the middle generation now that's in parliament or in government were all implicated in state capture. So there's a gap in the layer about who can be. So we are facing a bit of an issue. But we've been talking for over an hour, and I think I need to let you go. It's been an absolute honor and a privilege to chat to you, Albie. Thank you so much for spending the last hour with us and for giving us your point of view and for just, you know, the history lessons, just absolutely remarkable. Thank you very much for being here this evening. I really, really appreciate it. And thank you to everybody else. And have a great evening, everybody. And tomorrow, Albie, you might want to watch
on waving to everybody.
Is that the abridged version? Good night, everybody. Join us tomorrow. We're chatting to Kate Turkington, the Indomitable. Have a nice evening. Bye-bye, everybody. Good night.
Good night. Ciao.